everyone, welcome back to Bumblebee, my gods, goddesses, and ethereal beings. It's time once again to revisit the peoples of ancient times, today to learn about their top 10 scary events from ancient Rome. Number 10 is the annual exorcism that renders the whole month of May unlucky for marriages, hence the proverb, bad girls wed in May, aka Lemuralia, a whole private behind closed doors holiday dedicated to kicking ghosts out of your house. It dates back to hella pagan times, the 6th century BCE, and only seemed to tamper out around the 3rd. Held only on the lucky dates of May 9th, 11th, and 13th, philosopher Ovid tells us in his writings Fasti that Romulus began this tradition to appease the restless and angry spirit, otherwise called lemurs in Roman times, of his brother whom he killed. The head of the household was responsible for getting up at night, washing his hands in spring water, and walking through the home with his hands like this. He would either take a mouthful or handful of black beans and then spit them or throw them over his shoulder to the hungry spirits, repeating the following incantation 9 times. I send these with these beans, I redeem me and mine. While dad is doing that, give your kids some pots and pans and tell them to reenact Stomp. The household member's role is to clash bronze pots while repeating, ghosts of my fathers and ancestors, be gone. The householder washes his hands in spring water 3 times, rinse and repeat for 3 days, pun intended. The Lemuralia was meant to help those family members who had died in circumstances that prevented or delayed their admission to the afterlife. This could be dying before your time, or through sudden disease, war, misadventure, or a circumstance that would prevent a proper burial. On the 3rd day, they lightened the energy a little. A merchant's festival and fair was held to ensure a prosperous year for business. Number 9 is how Rome couldn't handle when badass Carthaginian general came a-knockin'. It's the Hannibal invasion. The Carthaginians had lost Rome in the First Punic War, and that was no picnic for anyone involved. The fragile truce called between the nations of Rome and Carthage was tenuous, and Rome was taking more and more control over the Mediterranean Sea by the day, which both economies heavily depended on. Just like in a movie, from the shadows of the concerned Carthaginians came Hannibal, the hot new young general on the scene and the son of Hamilcar, one of the best Carthaginian generals. Now, in the wake of his father's death, with the Roman rage train rolling and something to prove, Hannibal forms his own plan, one that became known as one of the most significant historical events of ancient Rome. They would come to Italy and descend from the Alps. In the spring of 218 BCE, Hannibal led one of the biggest military journeys in history, and what would follow was a series of increasingly catastrophic disasters for the Roman Senate. The first major pitched battle at the river Trebia in December of 218 saw over half the deployed Roman forces eradicated. The Roman consul Flaminius overreacts and pursues Hannibal's army into the hills of Lake Trasimene in June of 217, where they're ambushed and a total of 15,000 Romans are killed. Now, a consul is dead and a significant portion of the army is gone. Instead of recollecting calmly, Rome continues to panic, and the newly elected consuls are given 20,000 Roman men each, as well as 40,000 supplementary troops from Roman allies, stocking an army of around 80,000 men. Imagine being a civilian right now, just everyone is being called for draft men every day, they leave en masse, never return. It's with these forces that the consuls confronted Hannibal at the Roman supply base Cannae, where he had taken. But they did it without taking into account the flat terrain, heavily favored the Carthaginian cavalry. Lo and behold, it's a downright killing spree, and out of the 80,000 men who fought, only 14,500 Romans escaped death or captivity. Let's talk about some more Roman political fumbles. In number 8, the year of 4 emperors. Nero, the emperor who started his reign fabulously only to end it universally despised, was the first emperor to definitively take their own life. He did this with a lot of pomp and flair, but also without leaving an heir. This set up an immense power grab into motion, leading to the year of 4 emperors in 69 AD. So let's do a credit run for these guys, shall we? Galba, who follows Nero, pretty much killed every distinguished man without a trial for petty differences. But then, when the people of Rome called upon him to punish 2 corrupt legions, he gave them honors and promotions. He also allowed his friends to wield taxation and condemnation as political favors. He gets killed by his own guards and his body laid in the street until a common soldier sought its head and delivered it to Marcus Salvius Otho. Otho, now elected emperor, immediately has Vitellius on it, refusing all offers of peace settlements and demanding a battle. Otho loses 40,000 men to him, and the man who tells him this takes his life at Otho's feet. Otho couldn't tough it, so he said goodbye to his loved ones, dispersed his wealth, took his own life. The Senate immediately hands Vitellius the throne to spare themselves more battle. Was a gluttonous dirtbag. Disregarding democracy, he mimicked Nero in setting himself up to be the supreme power. He held his position for 8 months before the founder of the Flavian dynasty, Titus Flavius, suddenly had the legions of Syria, Alexandria, Moesia, Pannonia, Romania Illyricum, declaring him the emperor. And the terrified Vitellius disguises himself with rags and tries to escape the city, but fails. Next is the emperor who essentially lived as if in a cartoon. Number 7 is Caligula's reign. Living in Rome at the same time as this guy would be a nightmare on the sole basis alone. His favorite phrase was, "Remember, I have the right to do anything to anybody," because that is what you want to hear from your leader, and he was someone who took it quite literally. This included banging his friends' wives, or the torment and subsequent killing of high-ranking senators who dared to disagree with him. He even turned killing into a sport and just attacked people at random. Caligula famously caused a famine by draining the Roman treasury, having built vast monuments to his own greatness. After raising taxes to get some more petty cash, Caligula's spending quickly became out of control. In one famous incident, he arranged for hundreds of merchant ships to form a 3-mile-long floating bridge across the bay, which he galloped back and forth across on his horse for 2 days wearing a golden cape. Caligula wasn't like this at the beginning of his reign, when he led a series of political reforms and even recalled all the exiles from outside of Rome, but something shifted after a few months, which can be attributed to maybe a serious illness, leading Caligula to become increasingly erratic and deranged. He ordered his men to attack the beach and declared himself a god, appearing in public dressed as various gods and demigods. And he also removed the heads of gods' statues to put his own atop. He was the first Roman emperor to be killed in a coup. On to number 6, which is the crisis of the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic lasted for nearly 500 years, but the crisis of the Roman Republic was nowhere near as long, rather a decades of political instability that fed social unrest from 134 to 44 BC. During this period, Rome was often at war with its neighbors while simultaneously dealing with crippling civil wars and coups as aristocrats tried to hang on to their exclusive rights and privileges against the pressure from the rest of society. So many captured people were brought into the country, it created an influx of free labor which hurt the lower classes and disrupted the agricultural system, forcing small farmers to sell their land. Wealthy people bought votes and gave favors to their friends. Bribery and corruption were rampant and led to commoners distrusting Senate, and without a police force, crime was out of control. When Rome's conquests declined, so did their sources of income. This decrease in money resulted in a loss of support for the people of Rome and created enormous stress on that economy. Officials began to tax their citizens, furthering the peasant rage. The rise of Julius Caesar as a dictator led to civil war from 49 to 45 BC and saw Roman armies fighting each other in Italy, Spain, Greece, and Egypt. This, along with economic problems, government corruption, crime, and private arms, all led to the eventual fall of the Roman Republic in 27 BCE. And since it ties in so nicely, number 5 will be the fall of Rome. After the Republic eats it, Augustus can be accredited with the establishment of the Roman Empire. He successfully curb-stomped Mark Antony during the Battle of Atticum in 31 BC, and Cleo takes herself out of commission. Augustus sets up an excellent governing system and military, bringing Rome wealth, trade, and very few military defeats. The empire reached its peak when the territory stretched from the English-Scottish border to Saudi Arabia in 117 CE, with a population high of 70 million, which was 20% of the population of the world at the time. What he can't bring Rome, however, despite all the social reforms and religious control and successful conquests, is the peace they seemingly lost. The constant civil war, financial ruin, and clan invasions had demolished the kingdom's confidence, as proven by how far the barbarian clans even made it into the Roman territories, and when the city of Rome was sacked by the Goths, it led to the final fall of the empire in 476 CE. Number 4 covers the months following Caesar's death. It's the Alaskan volcano, which we now know is to blame for the unusual weather, plagues, and famines following the death of, as said, Caesar in 44 BCE. Ancient writers who survived the period described the sun's mysterious disappearance, unseasonably cold weather, short growing seasons if not completely failed crops, and widespread famine around the Mediterranean from Rome to Egypt. Throughout the empire, starvation led to disease and fueled growing civil unrest in already turbulent times. Sources document famines in northern Italy by April of 42 BCE and northern Greece of the next year. Famines are seen in Egypt, and it's speculate that they weakened that country, making it the perfect moment for Octavian to conquer it and solidify his hold on the nascent empire. A recent study of Greenland ice cores now suggests that the volcanic culprit is Mount Okmok in what's now Alaska, half a world away from Rome, whose smoke and smog block the sun and slow-spreading sulfur affect crops. Letters from Cicero, the Roman statesman whose death in 42 BC is considered the symbolic end of the Republic, mention cold weather around the time of the eruption, and the dated accounts show the slow travel of the volcano's toxins through the empire. Speaking of toxicity in Rome, let's do mass expulsions for number 3. These periods were known as the drastic points in ancient Roman history. Romans didn't really care for race or sex equality as long as you dressed, talked, and behaved like a Roman. That's all that was needed to be respected in their society, immigrant or otherwise. But without holding a Latin status, immigrants had very little protection. As a result, multiple times in Roman history, nobles and emperors alike decided to kick folks out, and for a variety of reasons. You're a lawyer, doctor, or a construction worker, doesn't matter how helpful you are out. Don't have a homeland to return to? Doesn't matter. Naturally, thousands would starve just outside of the kingdom's gates for that reason. However, a mass expulsion could calm angry Roman citizens looking for someone to blame during a famine, war, or plague. Generally something or anything that would cause shortages. Religions such as Judaism or Roman paganism was often a target for expulsion, as seen in 98 BCE and 177 BCE. Professions could also be targeted. Cicero writes of an expulsion of philosophers in 126 BCE. It may not be right, of course, for one who is not a citizen to exercise the rights and privileges of citizenship, and the law on this point was secured by two of our wisest consuls. Still, to prevent foreigners from enjoying the advances of the city is altogether contrary to the laws of humanity. In a time of famine, Suetonius talks of how Augustus expelled owned people and gladiators. Once indeed a time of great scarcity, when it was difficult to find remedy, Augustus expelled from the city the laborers that were for sale, as well as the schools of gladiators, all foreigners with the exception of physicians and teachers and a part of the household servants. And what better to follow up expulsion than something that caused one? Number 2 is the plague of 165 AD, whose victims would fall to fever and chills with diarrhea starting red that turned black within a week. During that time, black pockmarks would scab their bodies to peel off and leave deep-ditched wounds. Towards the end, people would even cough up or excrete scabs that had formed inside of them. Like some beast, a contemporary wrote, the sickness destroyed not just a few people, but rampaged across whole cities and destroyed them. Victims would suffer for 2, sometimes 3 weeks before dying or recovering by minor miracle. This was smallpox in its first form. The Romans had dealt with malaria, intestinal wasting diseases, and worms living in putrefying wounds that would refuse to heal. But smallpox was something that began as a terrifying rumor from the east, spreading through conversation that simultaneously transmitted news of the disease and the virus itself. The smallpox plague remained in Rome for a generation, finding a peak in the year 189 when it was taking as many 2,000 people per day. It decimated the aristocracy to such a degree that town councils couldn't meet, local magistracies went unfulfilled, and community organizations failed. Abandoned farms and depopulated towns dotted the countrysides from Egypt to Germany. Alrighty, last but never the least on the list, number 1 is horrific banquets. Roman history written between 211 and 233 by Dio Cass describes a hellish meal hosted by Emperor Domitian in the year 89. It was an event seemingly designed to torment its participants. The room was completely black, from the floor to the ceiling to the table. The guests, most of whom were senators, were each assigned a personalized gravestone seat. The food served was traditionally offered as sacrifices to departed spirits, and it was all also colored to be black. Every single one of the guests feared and trembled and was kept in constant expectation of having his throat cut at the next moment, writes Cassius. Domitian apparently relished in their terror, conversing only upon topics relating to death and demise. Whether or not this dinner actually happened, it falls into a subsection of very real dinner entertainment from the past, categorized by the late historian Phyllis Pray Barber as black or hell banquets, were designed to evoke funeral services at the least or afflictions of hell itself at the worst. One famous Roman account was in March of 1519, Lorenzo di Filippo Strozzi's home. It said that a few flickering candles revealed skulls, skeletons. According to one account, no one wanted to eat because it was such a terrifying scene, and when his guests couldn't take any more, apparently at least 2 cardinals vomited that day, Strozzi orchestrated the grand finale, cracking open the skull and bones to reveal they were fakes made of sugar and filled with roast pheasant and sausages. Alrighty, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more from us, and until next time, comment down below which time period of ancient Rome seemed the least ideal.